Hey, detoxers. Today we are talking about so called artificial intelligence. President Donald Trump, in his second term, signed an executive order on April 23rd, 2025, that promises to empower America's youth by adding AI to education. To talk about this, I'm joined by two great friends and collaborators, Sydney Sullivan of San Diego State University, Allison Butler of UMass Amherst, who certainly is no stranger to this audience. And we just completed a new curriculum outline of critical AI literacy with our co-collaborator Tyler Poisson, and it's titled "Teaching Critical AI Literacy: Tools and Strategies for the Classroom." Right now, it's at nolanhigdon.com. You can find that. Allison and Sydney, welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, Nolan.
Yeah, thank you. I want to have you guys on the show because, obviously there's endless conversation about AI. And President Donald Trump in his second term has signed two, I think, critical executive orders. I think we're going to find plenty to critique in here. But I want to talk about that in light of the new curriculum we just put together. So, Allison, I want to kind of start with you because your research has always raised a very important point that I think we skip over with all the excitement of new things to add to the classroom, which is how are we going to train teachers to be able to teach this stuff? So, as someone like yourself who's paid a lot of attention to professional development over the years, when you're seeing all this talk about adding AI literacy to the classroom, what are you thinking about in terms of professional development for our educators?
I'm thinking a few things. First, I think the first probably, and maybe the most important piece of advice that we could provide for our teachers, both K-12 and higher education, is to take a beat, right? AI is coming to us fast and furious. It's been around for a while. We keep getting promises that it's going to become more sophisticated. We keep getting sort of fearful promises that it's going to take over, that it's going to ruin reading, writing, all sorts of things. And I think teachers are living right now in a space of great confusion because one thing teachers don't have during, September through May, September through June is time, and time to think about these ideas or time to tackle them. They're just kind of dealing with what's in front of them. I would say all school years are difficult. This school year feels particularly more difficult with all the tumult coming out of our presidential administration. So the first thing I might want to say to teachers is just take a breath, take a beat. Let's kind of slow down and think through this, right? Um, I would also want to do whatever we can in whatever capacity, K-12 or higher education, to provide teachers with really practical support. Um, what can they use? What can they do in their classrooms that's going to matter to their classrooms? So that might mean we actually do a little bit less. It also definitely means that we have to be tailoring our work, right? What an English literature teacher needs is probably different from what a math teacher needs, is probably different from what a computer science teacher needs. So it's our job, I think, to think creatively about what our teachers need in their classrooms, but then also really support their leadership of what they're looking for, what they're struggling with, and how we can make it matter. We want teachers to be walking out of any kind of professional development saying, yeah, I can use that. Not, oh, those were really neat ideas, but I can go back and apply this now.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. And so, kind of jumping off of that, Sydney, let's talk about the students in the classroom because I think, as Allison rightly points out, there's been so much discussion about preparing teachers and whether or not we should bring AI in the classroom, which is something I want to talk to both of you about as well. But give a flavor for those who aren't in the classroom right now, Sydney. What are you seeing in terms of students and your conversations with AI?
Yeah, I talk about AI really explicitly in my classroom, which I think is helpful for getting a better feel for the students as well. And I make the space very comforting in terms of allowing them to have space to talk about things that maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable about or that they feel like would out them about AI. For example, I give them tips and tricks about how to use AI in ways for writing. And I remember one of my students specifically said, "Oh, I think that the SDSU, because we have implemented ChatGPT.edu, which is like the more sophisticated, better version of ChatGPT that we can use and students can use for free now. But one of the students said, "Oh, I don't like to log into that because I don't want the school knowing what I'm using it for." And I felt like that was really interesting, that they are so aware of what the school is maybe looking at. They're very aware of what they are and are not supposed to maybe be using ChatGPT for. And that fine line is really difficult because, as I've talked about with my students, there's so many different expectations in every single classroom. My classroom is very different than another classroom that, for example, doesn't allow any kind of usage for brainstorming or drafting, outlining, any of that. It all, even a lot of my colleagues have actually switched back over to paper. And so they're handwriting essays and grading essays handwritten as well. And so it is kind of this panic that Allison and Nolan, you're kind of insinuating of like, teachers don't quite know what to do. And so we're finding that they're either on one end of the spectrum or the other when it comes to their reaction to AI in the classroom.
Yeah, and on that, on that point, I was having trouble sleeping, so I read through these executive orders on artificial intelligence from Mr. Trump, and his first one that he signed in January of 2025, shortly after taking office. It's standard, boilerplate Washington stuff about how we need to deregulate the industry so AI can take off. That's where we're at. But the one on AI in education, it's kind of interesting. There's one part I know that both of you are going to want to jump on, but the first part is it's a task force that they created to investigate good strategies for implementing AI into education, which I would think is something all three of us are interested in supporting at some level. But of course, the language had in there that we want to collaborate with other partners, particularly those from industry as well. And so I'll start with you, Allison. But when you see that the federal government is talking about improving education and adding AI, but they want industry to be a part of it, based on the research we've done together and you've done, what does that say to you? What comes to mind?
Are we allowed to curse on this podcast? Because
Sure.
that's really what comes to mind, is some words that I don't think any of our mothers would be really proud of us for. It's data mining. It is the corporatization. It's the continued corporatization of education. It is building systems and tools on the backs of some of our most vulnerable populations, our children. It is a reinforcement of capitalism. I don't think that public education has ever not been to some extent connected with capitalism. Absolutely, it has been. But I think the romantic history of K through 12 in public education is that it was a place where children and teachers were able to be outside of that sort of profit margin and that desire for profit in the realm of knowledge production. This makes that come to a complete stop. I think if we look at some of our work on education, where we've seen, particularly for at-risk youth, for underserved populations, this notion of the school to prison pipeline. I think what we're looking at here is the school to capital, the school to private industry, the school to you are just a data point pipeline. I think we're changing the pipeline a little bit, and I think it is extremely damaging to anything that has the word public in it, or anything that we're doing for the public or for the common good. It is barely a smokescreen. It is barely a euphemism. It is not subtle in the least, and it is going to be taking all kinds of young people's information and manipulating it.
Sydney, do you want to jump in?
Evil, by the way, manipulating it. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with everything Allison said. And just to add, my first question would be, who's on the task force? It becomes very frustrating, especially in this administration, about even things like health, for example. I study well-being and mental health, but who's talking about vaccines, and is there a scientist there? And I think about that same thing when it comes to education. Where are the educators? Where are the teachers? Where is administration and directors, people who actually know and have researched and care about these issues that are going on with students. I think that would be the most important thing to me, is that someone who's taken the time and gone to school and actually read up the scholarship on this is participating in these conversations and is able to have their voice at the table, which I assume and don't think it is. So that becomes very frustrating. And I think, to Allison's point, like the lack of representation that is likely to just continue to happen when you have a task force that is just collecting data and using it for their own needs, is really frustrating and will just continue, I'm assuming, to get worse.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And let's talk about the educators for a minute. And I think the task force has not been put together yet. But let's be honest. The head of the Department of Education thinks that AI is A1.
At the speed of light, if we don't have the best technology around, to do that. I think it was a letter or a report that I heard this morning. I wish I could remember the source, but that there is a school system that's going to start making sure that first graders or even pre-Ks have A1 teaching, every year starting, that far down. So it wasn't all that long ago that we're going to have internet in our schools. Whoop. Now, okay, let's see A1 and how can that be helpful? How can it be helpful in one-on-one instruction? How can it be helpful in absorbing, more information for those fast learners?
She mixed up the sauce there, but I guess when you spend a career in entertainment and WWE, you don't really have a lot of time to study up on education or artificial intelligence. But that aside, I think that one of the things you're getting at there with educators is I think educators know, at least in my kind of anecdotal experience, they're well aware that AI is out there and being used. But I do seem to come across, and this surprised me, you tell me what you guys think, but I seem to come across a lot of educators who are like purposely burying their head in the sand. They want to not talk about it. They think I'm committing some great sin or stabbing them in the back by all of a sudden now saying, bring AI in the classroom. But as my audience will know, I'm not asking for corporate AI, but it's here. We have to introduce this. It's like ignoring the smartphone or something. Students are using it. But what's your guys' experience with, just kind of anecdotally with other educators or colleagues? I mean, are you feeling that as well? Kind of this resistance to accepting the fact it's here? Sydney,
Yeah.
let's start with you.
Yeah, definitely. I feel, well, there's a couple of things. And one of the things that I will say, to give educators a little bit of slack, is that I do feel like in education, you have so much pressure not to mess up. You have so much pressure to do the right thing, to be the best teacher, to have the most equitable classroom and good grading systems. And I remember this when I was first getting into what's known as contract grading and trying to change my entire system based around this more equitable grading practice. And I just remember not wanting to mess it up or do something wrong or feel like I was doing a disservice to the populations that I was trying to serve. And so, in that sense, I do feel for educators that they might feel this pressure of, I just don't want to do this in the wrong way. So I'm just not going to touch it at all. And in that way, I can kind of empathize and understand maybe why they're avoiding AI, or even maybe doing the opposite. Like I was talking about the handwritten essays, kind of retracting altogether because they're just not quite sure what is the right path. And it is difficult when you have so much conflicting information out there and so much polarizing information, when one group of people is telling you that something is exceptionally bad. And there are things that are bad about it. There are environmental factors that you have to consider, and there are ethical and biased factors that you have to consider. However, there are also lots of ways in which this can be a tool, for underrepresented populations as well, a tutoring tool, a help in order to get through the writing process that sometimes students struggle with. So I think that there is some good that can come out of it, but educators are stuck in this place that's kind of a rock and a hard spot. And I really do feel for them in that way. So yeah, but I'll let Allison discuss a little more.
I mean, I sometimes would, despite the work that I've done, Nolan, certainly the work that we've done together, the work that the three of us have done, and despite all of this, I would absolutely on many days put myself in the head in the sand position, right? There are so many things to pay attention to today. It is so hard to focus. If I can get rid of a couple of things to think about, sounds like my day just improved, right? So yeah, there are, and I, for example, like this semester, I'm not teaching. And I'm like, there's a part of me that really deeply, deeply misses it. But there's also a part of me that's like, whoa, there are things that I legit do not need to be thinking about because I'm not in a classroom this semester. Because it is hard. And there is, to Sydney's point, there is so much conflicting information. Teachers are absolutely between a rock and a hard place. One of the ways that I try and kind of work myself out of that is to rely on some just kind of old fashioned things, right? That like when a new technology is introduced, there is a simultaneous fear and fascination. And maybe some of our jobs is to try and our just to sort of keep our humanity is to try and not go to either of those places. Don't be so fearful of it because then it has more power than it actually probably does, and certainly more than it should. But also don't be so fascinated by it because it's a shiny object. Chances are we can live somewhere in between that, right? I would also want to go do the work that all of us do, that work of critical media literacy, and say, hey, here's what's in front of us that's super interesting. I plug in a sentence, a question, and I get this immediate answer that's pretty lengthy and at first glance seems kind of maybe thorough. Got to look at it more closely. But I would say it's our job to also kind of step away from that. Where's this coming from, right? ChatGPT and any of the generative AI, they come from the fact that we've put a bunch of stuff out into the world, right? So like, yeah, it's really fascinating that it can spit out a standard 5 paragraph essay in like 90 seconds, if that. But where did that come from? It's not a mysterious thing, right? It's the Wizard of Oz. Let's look behind the curtain, see who's pulling what levers. Why are these levers being pulled? Chances are in the United States and around the world, it's for profit, right? Whose profit? Because it certainly isn't mine. I'm not making any, like, this isn't making my economic life easier. And then again, just to emphasize Sydney's point about the environment, here's this fascinating thing that comes to us in our tiny little screen on our phones or our laptops. Again, it takes no time. But it does have a cost, and that environmental cost is no joke, and we should be paying attention to that. And we deserve to be knowing more about that. So that's the way that I kind of try and talk myself out of the head in the sand, is to say, how about I look at other things that are slightly less of the shiny object, and maybe rooted in stuff that feels a bit less overwhelming to me to ask questions about, to learn about, and hopefully if I can make it less overwhelming for myself, I can support others in making it less overwhelming as well.
And if I could bounce off of Allison for just a moment, I feel these conversations that she's encouraging people to have, these are so seamlessly interwoven into classrooms. They can be 15, 20 minutes of just really allowing people to see either what AI is capable of and having a critical discussion of it, or something quick like, oh, we're going to do your first outline of this paper this way. How about you tell me what is and is not working well? It's just a way I feel where it's not so overwhelming for educators. And even though these can be continuous conversations, they are really seamlessly interwoven into what we're already doing as educators, just different kinds of assignments or activities that are a little updated. And I feel like as an educator, you always want to be updating assignments that are relevant to the world around you. In my classes, I pull from pop culture a lot. Like this year, we did the Super Bowl halftime show, and I did a survey the other day, and all of my students were like, my favorite assignment was when we went over the Super Bowl halftime show. And I was like, oh, okay. So I think in so many ways, pulling from the world around us and having these conversations interwoven in little ways throughout the classroom are going to be effective. And as Allison's saying, not too overwhelming or putting too much glory onto AI either.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And those conversations too. I mean, I had Gary Smith on the program. He spoke to this, and Allison, what you said. I also had Tina Smith on, and folks go back in the archives, or Tina Austin, excuse me, can go back and look at that in the archives. But in both cases, they were talking about how the industry is controlling the narrative right now, and they're calling these tools intelligent. And they're saying it can solve problems and do things faster. But folks who've actually researched it say no, it gets things wrong. It fabricates things. It creates, and this is where Allison, I think, spoke to some of the stuff Gary was talking about, which is it's a feedback loop. It's all of our private information it takes to create, in air quotes, knowledge, but it's really the stuff we've already said it's sending back at us. And we think we're getting some like intellectual depth, but really we're just getting information thrown back at us that we created. So we've talked a lot about educators, both those who kind of maybe want to avoid it, those who are afraid of it, but there's also plenty of folks I know who are really interested in integrating this in the classroom, but they're not, media folks. They're not critical media literacy. They have other areas of expertise. And so three of us worked with Tyler on developing this teaching critical AI literacy tools and strategy for the classroom. And I'll pop it up on the screen. But we have these different, aspects, units that educators can go through to teach critical AI literacy. So let me throw it back at you guys. Let's say you get some educator who's interested and wants to add AI to the classroom. They're totally overwhelmed. They don't know the critical media literacy language around this stuff. You hand them this resource. What do you say to them? What's your advice to folks who are interested and come across this free resource?
I think I would start with kind of what we talked a little bit about before, which is like, this is something you can, if you so choose, it can kind of be plug and play. It can be ready to go in your classroom. Pick an assignment, pick up an assignment prep, take it, right? I mean, I think all of us are in agreement of like free range, open source, let's share this. Let's flip the narrative, right? As you said, Nolan, like the industry's the one controlling the narrative. We can do differently. We can do it differently, right? But I would also try and do a few things, like support a teacher in doing a few things simultaneously. To Sydney's point before about sort of polling kind of what's out there, is have your class work on something together, right? And as Nolan, you said before, that in the industry controlling the narrative, they are the ones that have named all of these things. So let's take a look at that, right? It's called intelligent, it's called generative, it's called social media, it's called all sorts of things. Maybe what we do is start unpacking some of that. So one of the assignments that we've got in the curriculum is for everybody to work together to ask generative AI the same question. And we start to see that the answers are going to be different, because what's out there isn't totally 100% uniform, right? So if maybe your class is too big to do this, right? I mean, I have plenty of colleagues who teach large lecture classes. You're not going to get 300 people to do this. It would just be overwhelming for the class. But for those of us that might have smaller classes, or maybe if our large lecture classes have discussion sections or something like that, what if 20 of us ask a generative AI system the same question? And then we look even just at the first paragraph. Is it saying the exact same thing? Are there word choice differences? Is it bringing up a different style? Then we have worked against the narrative. One, we've demystified it. Like, hey, look, at all of us are together seeing that this is doing something different. Also, we're in it together, right? We're kind of countering this sort of hyper isolated, hyper individual approach to all of this. We're doing this as a community, we're doing this as a team. We then can deconstruct it as a team, as a community, to see what its flaws and benefits are. And I think we're also at a time with the technology where this is something that our students and our teachers are learning simultaneously. So let's learn it simultaneously, right? Let's do that. Let's say, hey, this is new. I'm not going to be ashamed to admit as an instructor that this is new to me, because unless I'm involved in computer science, then yeah, it's new to me. That's okay. Let's do this together. Let's see what we can understand together. And then we're already pushing back on so much of the hyper individuality expected of us these days, so much of the hyper competition expected of us these days. We're making our classrooms spaces of collaboration and community, and we're changing the narrative. Even if it's just by this much, we're changing it.
Sydney, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to emphasize Allison's point of having the classroom be a collaborative space. I think if we're not doing that, what is kind of the point of a classroom? Being able to be there together, facilitate conversations together. So much of my work in the classroom, I feel, is as a facilitator, being able to allow them to come up with these ideas and these thoughts, because I'm not just like a voice of knowledge which deposits information onto them. I'm very much trying to allow them to cultivate ideas and meaning for themselves and then share that amongst one another. Because I think so many times they're some of the smartest people in the room, and they can really allow these conversations to happen through one another. I think one of the nice things Allison pointed out about the materials for the AI literacy tools and strategies is just being able to do the plug and play, but also just the discussion questions. And I feel like the references can be really helpful, because one of the things I felt the most overwhelmed by when first getting into AI is just the not knowing who was having this conversation and not knowing which authors to go to. So I think that is really helpful. Knowing who is really an authority on the subject is useful. And then knowing what kinds of questions might actually be able to cultivate some sort of meaning in the classroom space. And those could even be things that you just put up on the board one day and you start the classroom conversation out and see where it goes. That can be a really easy discussion that happens. And I think for every educator, every teacher, the amount in which you use AI is going to be so vastly different. And so being able to have small ways and then these larger units as well can be really useful in terms of the scale in which you're falling on. That'd be nice.
Yeah, and I think it's set up in a really accessible way by topic. So, like maybe some folks who are listening today were really interested in what you all brought up about the environmental impact. We have we have a module that addresses that. There's disinformation, media literacy, the economy, the politics of it. So, I think even folks who aren't in a formal classroom setting could get a lot out of this, whether they want to have these discussion questions with their children or their community or their family or whatever. So, I hope folks will check it out. Before we get out of here, the two of you have got so much going on, so much resources. So, and Sydney, you've got a big announcement that just happened today too. So, do you want to tell folks where they can follow more of your work and what you just got into with your Substack?
Oh, sure. So you can follow me anywhere on Sydney Sullivan, PhD. I just started a Substack, so I'm in that world now. Woohoo. So you can follow me there, Sydney Sullivan, PhD for everything. And yeah, I'm excited to continue to just be in more digital spaces and trying to get more information out about how we can be better and healthier and have better mental health in those spaces too.
Allison, where can folks follow more of your work?
I think I'm just going to jump on both of your Substack bandwagons so that I don't have to start one myself. I'm pretty easily findable at UMass Amherst. I'm definitely most easily found there. Working on some stuff right now, about to kind of get back into some, the dreaded editing phase of book for general audience on gender as judgment, how women are centered and silenced in pop culture. As you can imagine, there's been a lot I've actually, like a lot of things, I've been trying to ignore it a little bit lately, mostly just dealing with all the fires that need to be put out, but I'm going to be getting back into it to do some of the final edits. And obviously there's a lot to talk about there, especially with this current political environment that we're in.
Excellent. Well, great work as always. Definitely have you two back on. Allison, certainly going to have you back on when the book comes out. And check out their work, Detoxers. They're worth listening to. Allison, Sydney, thank you so much.
Hey, Detoxers. Thanks for tuning in. You can find Disinfo Detox on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Every click helps grow the community and keeps those tech overlords happy. Detox complete.